Hello, friends, both old and new. I am John, or in this case, Jin St. Baptiste, and welcome to Believe. This week we are discussing chapters 9 and 10 of Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology, and I am pretty excited about that. To me, these are two of the most humorous stories in this book. Also, it goes into something we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, which is the motif that tricksters kind of screw themselves just as often as they screw other people. It's part of the nature of a trickster deity, so I think it's quite important motif to be threading throughout the narrative in this entire collection. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. Some people are in the chat. I hope some of you who couldn't make it are watching afterwards and enjoy this discussion. Please, if you have any questions, if you've read this or if you've not read this, please have them ready because I don't have anybody co-hosting with me this week, and I am more than happy to answer any questions you might have. So I'm going to say hi to the people in the chat right now. We've got Lauren's Corner, Dark Mother, House of the Conqueror, also known as Johnny Be Crazy, and Forrest Blairta. Brown Holler was here a bit earlier. My one spanner to rule them all has not been able to do her spanner job lately because of the time change. So actually, I'm thinking of moving this up a bit earlier, to accommodate for her, but also for myself. Maybe doing this an hour earlier every day. If you all have any thoughts or opinions about that, please let me know. But I think to do this 1 hour earlier in the day on Wednesday might be good. Might be better for everybody. Of course, there are also people who live in my time zone, the Eastern Standard Time Zone, or even further west, who they might be at work. So please, in the comments section down below, drop any thoughts you might have. Also, while you're down that way, if you could be so kind as to like and subscribe, share, hit all those bells, buttons, all the things. Hit all three. And oh, that could be construed in a very dirty manner. Oh, and hello, OTDA. House of the Conqueror, the wall that separates the world of the humans and the giants, I will definitely get into. It doesn't really go too much into it in either of these stories, but I believe in the next chapter it does extensively. And I'll do a little overall about that today. But yeah, if anybody can, while they're if you're watching this afterwards, just leave in the comment section what's a good time of day for you. I'm going to do a vote. Kind of like I did a vote with the music aspects of my channel. I asked people if playlists are better put up on Saturdays or Mondays, and I got more votes for Mondays, so things during the week. Alicia Kingston's joined us. Welcome, Alicia. So, the first of the two chapters we're going to be covering today is Thor's Journey to the Land of the Giants. Now, I know some of you have read this material. Some of you are not quite familiar yet, but hey, you can watch it in the afterward. So we're getting to the beginning of the story. This is what I like about these two stories nowadays is that it there are recurrent motifs throughout all sorts of different religions and mythologies that are in these stories, and we're covering today. This is the guest story. In a lot of mythologies, you have a story where gods show up looking like people who are asking for alms or asking for accommodation or asking for hospitality, and they're denied this by a large portion of the populace, but there are some very few people who are kind enough to do so and to take care of them. So we have Thiafi and Roskva. And by the way, Forrest, I know you live in a Germanic country, so please correct me on my pronunciation if I messed it up, because as we've discussed on this channel before, I took Latin, and my pronunciation of Northern European languages is pretty rich. And yes, Dark Mother, Lot and the Angels. Very good point. Lot and the Angels, Zeus and Hermes visiting. Oh, I can't remember their names. There was an old couple in a village. They were the only ones they let survive. But yes, it is a recurring motif in a lot of mythology. And so Loki and Thor go here, and they're they visit this brother and sister, and they're offered hospitality by this brother and sister where they've not been offered any hospitality by anybody else in this village. Now, they don't go on a big killing spree like a lot of deities do in this situation. In fact, what they do is the couple offers them everything they have, and Thor says, hey, well, I'll offer what I have. And he has two goats who pull his chariots. Well, they can be reborn and so forth, so he slaughters them. And the one thing he says is that they'll be reborn, but, don't mess with their bones. And, of course, Loki doing Loki things, which is, it's not even malicious. Loki as a trickster deity, I mean, he can be malicious, don't get me wrong. But most of the time, it's just fulfilling his nature. And you see this recurrent motif throughout so much mythology and so many religions with trickster deities, is that they screw themselves as often as they screw others. And they just can't help themselves. This story kind of gives you that. The next one, even more so. But he says to Thalafi, oh, hey, Thor sucks the marrow out of those bones. Like that, that's the best part. There's also a recurrent motif in a lot of mythology about gods attaining and keeping their godhood by not giving in to mortal desires. One of the biggest examples I can think of is Hermes on the first day he was born, and he stole Apollo's cattle. He sacrifices all of the cattle to the gods, but he sacrifices some to himself. He eats none of them. And there's a certain point to that, and that point is giving into base desires separates people from spiritual payoff. Dark Mother, in answer to your question, who else is a trickster like Loki in myth? Well, actually, uh, if I can do some show and tell, my entire right arm, with a couple exceptions, is covered with trickster gods. Uh, this is the fox right here. We have Mercury or Hermes, whichever you would prefer to call him, Loki, Anansi, Raven, uh, and my next is probably going to be Papa Legba. But yeah, there are a number of trickster gods. Quixote, um, and Quixote. What I like about Quixote, he for me is very reminiscent of Loki because, as I said, you have trickster gods who screw themselves as often as they screw everybody else. Another would be Prometheus, would be considered a trickster deity in a lot of ways. And I'm talking about some of the larger, more prominent in mythology that people in the West are familiar with. If you would like some Eastern examples, I do have a bit of research that I could share. Oh, and Alicia's Pan. Uh, Pan's interesting because he has some aspects of a trickster deity, but more that he also is a primal deity and has so many aspects of a god of the wild and a god of the wilderness and a god of madness, kind of like Bacchus, both of whom are imports to Greek religion. Uh, Bacchus or Dionysus came from Central Asia, and Pan came from somewhat north of Greece, more in the Balkans, more of your forested areas, because that's his ballywhack. But getting back to this story that we have here, so Thalafi, he eats the marrow of the bones, and the next day Thor is like, "Hey, I've got this trick. I put my goats back together, and they can pull my chariot again." By the way, who the hell has goats pull the chariot? There's another funny goat story we're going to talk about today. But puts them back together, and since Thalafi ate some of the bone marrow, the goat's limping, and Thor's like, "Come on, man! All I said was don't mess with their bones." It goes back even to almost like the Pandora motif, like the one thing you're not supposed to do, you do. I can't remember the name of the story. It's Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale where the girl lives in a house with 100 rooms and she's allowed to open 99 doors, but not the one. It's like kind of the same thing. If you're forbidden from something, a lot of times people go ahead and do it. Or in the words of Neil Gaiman, if there has never been, I'm going to quote this incorrectly. There's never been a perfectly formed apple that wasn't worth the trouble you got into for eating it. Dark Mother and tempting Jesus, was Satan a trickster? Not so much. He was a spirit of temptation. I would say a trickster did. I mean, maybe a very dark shadow aspect of the trickster god motif, but generally, tricksters, by their nature, open a door to change. So I would say, if one is talking about the Bible, the serpent in the Garden of Eden was definitely a trickster deity. Satan with his temptation of Christ, I think that's a little more left to interpretation, if that makes sense to anybody. Lawrence Corner, Satan and Lucifer at a certain point are two different people. Well, yeah. Um, Lucifer was Satan's name before he was cast out, and Satan, or Shaitan, if you go with the original Hebrew, is more. If you look at the, we're getting way off topic here, but I don't mind this because theology is something that I passionately love. There is more of a motif of almost like a lawyer who argues against God in the Old Testament, as opposed to in the New Testament, where you read it and it's the adversary, and not an adversary like it would be in a courtroom or a discussion, but an adversary who is genuinely trying to corrupt and destroy humanity. And there are a lot of reasons that view might have changed. I have my own personal viewpoints, but the one that is most generally put forth by scholars of Middle Eastern religion is that changed because the de-emergent concept of Zoroastrianism, which was quite prominent at the time of the development of Christianity. So you have a de-emerge, you have that dual nature. And yes, Dark Mother, actually, Gaiman wrote a few short stories that feature Lucifer. And also, actually, if you want, you can go back in my archives and look. Amy True and I discuss Neil Gaiman's Murder Mysteries, which touches quite a bit on the nature of Lucifer and life in heaven for angels before man was created. And yes, House of the Conqueror, essentially, Zoroastrianism was the first dualistic religion. There are aspects of that to earlier religions, but straight up, straightforward dualism, yeah, that would definitely be the place that it began. Lawrence Corner, yeah. Well, Gaiman produced Lucifer. Most of it was written by other authors, but he did produce it, and he wrote a few issues, if I remember correctly. If I don't, correct me. And Constantine, yeah, he did do a storyline in Constantine. Constantine was Alan Moore's creation, but Gaiman did do a storyline in Constantine. But going back to the myth, so because he ate the goat's marrow, uh, you know, Thalafi owes Thor a debt, so he becomes his manservant, which that's kind of weird, but I'm not Norse. Hey, they might have a different set of rules than I do. Um, And you know, to his credit, he admits that he did it. And of course, when he admits that he does it, Thor gets all like, you know, pissy Thor. Oh, I ought to break this. Oh, I ought to smash it. You know, for those of you Marvel fans out there, don't take this offensively, but Marvel's representation of Thor is nothing at all like the representation of Thor in traditional Norse mythology. If you've not read this, they're really different. I mean, Thor's just a big dumb oaf, and his hammer does get bigger when he rubs it. Except the handle doesn't get bigger; just the end of the hammer does. I don't think I'm going to go into the connotations about that. I'll let you go ahead and take what you like from it. But to his credit, you know, Fluffy says, "Hey, I did this. I'll take care of it. I'll pay for it." Lauren's Corner says traditional Thor is a bit of an oaf. Lauren, that's like saying I'm a little tall. I mean, it's a nice understatement, but you know, traditional Thor is a fucking idiot. But a bit of an oath is a very nice way to put it. You would have made a great Southern belle. You could say "bless her heart." If anybody gets that joke, let me know. So they go on and they find the giant Miguleke, who's basically like Loki, but 10 times worse. And but he offers his hospitality to Thor and Loki and Themir. And sorry, I'm just trying to keep up with my notes here and keep up with the chat. I'm sorry, I have very poor notes this week. My notes are awful. You know what? I'm just going to answer any Norse mythology questions you have because I'm pretty sure I will have a guest next week and we can talk about this a little more extensively. So, any questions about Norse mythology, trickster gods, mythology in general, religion, anything like that? I'm just going to go ahead and talk about. We'll talk about this for about the next 30 minutes or so, and I will have better notes next week. Well, I apologize for that. Dark Mother, bless her heart, is what black women say when pale women try to cook. Yes, it can mean that. It's white Southern for fuck that bitch. I do know that. And God love him means that fucking idiot. So yeah, since it seems like my my notes are a bit bad and I don't have anybody to bounce this off of really and discuss it with, and I apologize. I thank you all for showing up here. Does anybody have some questions they would like to ask about mythology? Kind of tried to do this last week, but we had a first-time guest on, and no questions were put together ahead of time. So Yeah, please ask me some general questions. Johnny had to leave, said he will probably be back. And Maura had to leave. She has to go back to work. Maura, have a great day at work. But yeah, I may have a very special guest next week. I will definitely have at least one guest next week. Maybe a very special one. I'm sorry that there are some content creators who can sit and talk about something by themselves for 2 hours and be very engaging, but I am not one of those. So, questions: does Fenrir appear in A Song of Ice and Fire? Hmm. Uh, I don't think Fenrir appears directly. I could say he definitely appears indirectly. And then so many Odin clones in that series. Hey, Mackenzie, how are you? Dark Mother, could you elaborate a little on what you're talking about Odin clones? Because, I mean, there are some very, very, very different aspects of Odin. And he's a god of death. He's also a god of deceit, a god of trickery, a god of judgment, a god of knowledge, a god of wisdom. You know, one of the really, really interesting things about Norse mythology is that the spheres, so to speak, that their deities cover are a little more disparate than they are in a lot of other mythologies. How does Fenrir appear indirectly in Song of Ice and Fire? My answer to that would be that I think very loosely there's the influence on of him on the whole concept of dire wolves, but that's extremely loosely. I would say it's more of a direct analogy to Targaryen dragons and um, oh my gosh, the names fail to come to me. Valerion and uh, Danny's big black dragon. I can't remember his fucking name. Sorry. Because they're these creatures that they're creators that the people who their parents, for lack of a better term, can't control. But also they sow the seeds of their own Drogon. Thank you. But they sow the seeds of their own destruction by the mistreatment of these creatures. If you look at the Fenrir myth, which we did talk about, not last week, the week before, um, you know, Fenrir, if the gods had just been like, okay, hey, you're pretty powerful, but you know what? We want you on our side. We're not going to try and trick you and do a bunch of shady shit. Ragnarok would never happen. So that would be my relation on that. By Odin clones, I can't think of anyone who I would call an Odin clone. They're different Votanic aspects, I think, in some different characters, but I can't think of a character who embodies that many different fields and fortes. Yes, Dark Mother, polytheistic gods usually are pretty shady. Um, it's what it you look at, particularly a lot of your Mediterranean mythologies, whether it be the Carthaginians, the Etruscans, the Greeks, the Romans, which was pretty much a cross between the Etruscans and the Greeks. There's nothing or very little admirable that their deities do. Their form of worship was more of a placation and a asking for things than quite a few of your Eastern polytheistic or Western or Central Eastern monotheistic beliefs. It's different. My father, who is a clergy person, always has this. He had this quote that he gave me once, and it has always stuck with me. And it's that the difference between prayer and meditation is that prayer is talking to God, and meditation is listening. And very much the polytheistic religions, whether they be Mediterranean or Northern European, in the West, I've always felt that there's that certain level of, hey, let's make a deal. If that makes any sense to anybody. Dark Mother, what about all the characters missing an eye? Yes, there are quite a few Ice and Fire characters who are missing an eye. But I can't think of, with the possible exception of Bloodraven, I can't really think of a mythology or of a character that it syncs up with the mythology of sacrificing your eye for more knowledge, sacrificing your physical knowledge for your spiritual knowledge, the same way that it was with Odin. If you have another example, please put it out there. Also, anybody else, if in reading and studying Norse mythology, if you can think of any other things in literature, in telly, or anything like that, that to an extent are influenced by this, please share. I would love to hear. Except, as I've said, I am going to try and avoid talking about Marvel's Norse mythos because it is, don't get me wrong, I love me some Jack Kirby, but it is so disparate from a lot of the traditional motifs that are in Norse mythology. So, next week I think will be better to talk about these two chapters, because I should have somebody to discuss them with, which means you can ask more than myself questions. I mean, I have some pretty set and ingrained thoughts and ideas. Dark Mother, you seem to have some really good insights. If you would be interested in guesting on an episode of Believe, either while we're discussing Norse mythology or the next piece of Gaiman's work that I'm looking at going to, please hit me up. You can find my social media down in the description, private message me, please. And I would love to have you on to discuss this. Sorry, I'm very waffly today. I have had a lot going on, but I wanted to put something out to talk to you all today, and I just, if you just joined us recently, which a few people it looks like have, lurkers, which is fine. I lurk. Yeah, I feel discussing these chapters would be a little more interesting when I have somebody else to discuss. A woman may have a minor in the classics. Well, then I would absolutely be interested in discussing with you. So please hit me up, Dark Mother. This point in the story, does anybody? This point in the book, does anybody have any thoughts? Or also, um, Dark Mother asked about how I think that maybe A Song of Ice and Fire ties into Norse mythology. Can anyone think of any other works of literature, whether they be current or classic, that have some of those aspects, or that one would like to ask about? And one of the most interesting things about our Norse mythology that we have, that I talked about on the first episode when we were discussing this book, is that there wasn't any written down, at least in a way, in a language we can understand, version of these stories, of these tales, until after the Christianization of all your Nordic cultures. Our first are the Poetic and the Prose Eddas, which we got about 1,000 years ago, which was significantly long after most of these stories were conceived. So, one always has to ask oneself that question: if you were to go back and uh, talk to someone who was more familiar with these before the Christianization of Northern Europe, if would have been a little different. But yes, which would mirror Maesters trying to tell stories of the first men. Yes. Dark Mother, I'm not sure about your views in A Song of Ice and Fire, um, about the gray rats, but uh, I'm a big Maester conspiracy person. Yeah, through the lens of Christianity, okay, I can see that comparison you're trying to make. I'm thinking, and it's always been my thought, even more so through the lens of the Enlightenment. Uh, the Maesters and what I think their end game and their whole purposes reminds me more of an almost mythologized concept of Enlightenment philosophers. And don't get me wrong, I'm not disparaging Enlightenment philosophers, okay? Like Voltaire is my hero. But it's this just trying to eliminate every single possible concept of anything that is magical or supernatural or divine or anything like that. The best of all possible worlds. Yeah, it might be. All right, Mr. Robot, welcome. I've never seen you here before. Did Thor smash the world serpent Jormungandr so hard into Yggdrasil that during Ragnarok it sent him back in time where he met his father Loki as a child? Hmm. There is an interesting thing there. No, I don't think that Thor defeats the world serpent. I mean, it's left to interpretation, but I've never had the feeling that he actually wins. Have I heard that one? Yeah, to an extent. I've heard a variation on this theme or this concept, but oh, that's a tough one to answer. What I do like about this conceptual idea, and like I said, I've heard some variations on it, but I like the way you put it best, I believe. Oh, I know nothing about the God of War video game. I have no. I I like watching other people play action games. I don't generally prefer playing them myself. I mostly play RPGs and fighters, um, and tactical strategy games. And I only give myself one night a week that I can game because otherwise I wouldn't get shit done. I have to be very, uh, very strict about that with myself. And it's a work night, or I'd literally just lay in bed all day and get nothing done for an entire day. Dark Mother, glad to hear that Voltaire is also one of your heroes. Yeah, I love me some Voltaire. Uh, but what I was hitting on, Mr. Robot, is that there is in Norse mythology more than almost any other mythology that I can think of, besides possibly Hindu, is this cyclical concept. Because Ragnarok's not really the beginning and it's not the end. It's like it's like 12 o'clock on a clock. So I think that the way the stories are told are so cyclical. I think that might. Hmm. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to think on that one. I Oh yeah, Dark Mother. I definitely like to discuss that, especially because uh, contemplating how Christian writers may have twisted myths in the retelling. Because I study so much theology, and it's a real interest to me, and I think I can definitely see, for better and for worse, a lot of those influences on particularly Norse, but in general Western mythology. Job, A Comedy of Justice. Oh my gosh, I haven't read that since ninth grade. I need to look and see if I have that still. If not, I'll definitely pull it. If it's Heinlein, shit, it might even be public domain. I might even be able to find it online. But yeah, so Dark Mother, it sounds like you would have a lot to add to one of these conversations. So if you think you would like to, please private message me, and I could definitely have you on one of these weeks. I would love to talk to you about mythology, Norse mythology, or anything else, Gaiman. By the way, I said I'm going to another piece of work after I finish up Norse mythology. Now, since it's Gaiman, I have already read both of these, but I want opinions, whether you would like to leave them here in the chat, or if you're watching this afterwards, if you'd like to leave them down in the comments. When I finish Norse mythology, looking at either doing Neverwhere or Stardust. So I would like some opinions on that, or everybody to tell me what they think would be better, and also if one of those pieces is near and dear to somebody's heart and they'd like to commit to, about 2 months of discussion about one of those said pieces of work, then please hit me up and let me know. Because I would like to hear from you. All I ask is that, barring acts of God or unhealth, if you can commit to about 2 months of discussing a book once a week for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. So if you are interested in that, let me know. Lauren's Corner voted very loudly for Neverwhere. Great book. I have still not seen the miniseries, and the book's based on the miniseries. A lot of people think it's the opposite, but I need to, and I think that might be my Christmas present to myself. Book is the best ever, the most magical when it comes to imagination. I could see that. I definitely see that. So yeah, give your opinions. I'm gonna go ahead and end this. Sorry, so short. But I'm glad I answered some questions that some people had, and that we've shared some thoughts back and forth, some ideas. Especially Dark Mother in particular, and Mr. Robot. You've given me some things to think about, because I know you're saying that's from God of War video game, but actually, that's a theological concept that's been around for quite some time, involving rebirth and so forth. So yeah, I'm definitely going to have to do a little research on that. So next week I should have somebody on with me. Somebody to discuss this with, and we will be discussing. And I'll go ahead and just start back over because I started this so poorly this week. But we'll be starting back over with Thor's Journey to the Land of the Giants and the Apples of Immortality. So that's your homework, and I look forward to discussing it with you. Thank you all for showing up today or showing up later, and thank you for dealing with the more ad hoc situation that this was today. I do appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, if you would please be so kind, PLUR, be excellent to one another, and party on.